Thank you, Elaine. Appreciate that. Yes, I like to call Jambles my first kid. He came before the other human kids. And if you were to see us, if you were an alien to come down to planet Earth and see how I treated my dog versus how I treat my kids, you'd think he was my owner. And in some ways he is, especially if you're 14 and you have a bad back like he does. Well, thank you all for joining this session. Hey man, how's it going? Yeah, it's all good. It's happy Saturday as well. I think it was super cold last night for some strange reason. Now suddenly it's like really nice. Global warming, maybe? I don't know. It's yeah, exactly. It should be 60 degrees in February in the nation's capital. Yeah, so thank you for that intro, Elaine. Very much appreciate it. I work with Elaine, a lot of the folks in this room here. I'm going to talk about this concept of design through the eyes of a child. Just to set the record straight, this is not necessarily about designing for children. This is really how my life, my real life as a father, much less so as a creative director for Publicis Sapient, informs my sensibilities for design, makes me think and frankly question a lot of the decisions that I make on a daily basis for my design work, how I interact with my team. But also, I think hopefully, this is not necessarily a tutorial, but it's just a way to maybe imbue some different thinking in the work that you do every day. So, yeah, I'm not going to talk about me. So, I want to introduce you to my family. It's my wife, Shirley. Full disclosure, she left the workforce about 4 years ago. She spent 16 years in human resources. And left to get her master's in counseling. So she's actually a mental health professional. And a lot of the stuff that we do from a user research perspective, she's like, stop telling me this because I already know it. This is kind of what I do with my patients, except they're schizophrenics. And you could say some of our clients are too, but I think I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. It's my son, Peter, there in the middle. It's kind of a dated picture, but he still kind of looks like that. That's Jambles. In case you're wondering. That's my fourth kid, Beer. I have some might say an unhealthy relationship with them as well. My favorite team's the Boston Red Sox, and that's my daughter, Sydney. But I'm going to be focusing my talk not so much on Beer or my wife, but really those two munchkins in the middle, Sydney and Peter. And, funny story, I was talking with an old friend of mine who said, how some dads or some parents say that, by the way, a show of hands, who's a dad? Who's a parent? Who has kids? Oh yeah, okay. Some newer than others, right? He said, how some parents say that the happiest day of their life is when their first child was born or the second child was born? That was not the case for me. I was terrified that day. I remember saying to my wife, there's no reason why we should be able to take this child home. I'm no way qualified to do this. And then I realized, yes, people have been having babies for thousands of years and had, hopefully less intellect than my wife or I. But it's the distance you travel and the journey that you take with them that helps you look back fondly on that day as the happiest moment. It might not have been there at the time, but distance makes the heart grow fonder. So you can imagine every time I come home from a long day at work, the only thing I really want to do, crack open that beer that I like to talk about so fondly, maybe eat, and have a conversation with my kids about how their day was. And lo and behold, most days, in fact all days when I come home, I see this. Is this a familiar sight to you? Your kids are buried in their devices, earbuds in the ears, streaming through God knows what kind of content, or obsessing over God knows what kind of video game, and really couldn't give me the time of day. And it's heartbreaking for me as a parent, because you like to think that you have only but so much time to spend with your kids on a daily basis, but through really their entire lives. And so you want to make sure that you're coaching them, you're giving them the right guidance. And, I'm going to talk a little bit about device addiction because that's a real thing. So how do we as designers really think about the relationship we have with technology and how we're modeling behavior and the reliance on technology that will impact their growth, that will impact their behavior, and how does that inform some of the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis. And I look at this and I think to myself, God, it's my fault. I did this. They're modeling my behavior. This is permanently glued to my face, my eyes, my body, what have you. My life is kind of lived through this device, and they see me doing it every day, and I can't help but blame myself for this, right? And I'm trying to give myself the benefit of the doubt, but it's not just one thing, it's not just a series of things, it's sort of like the relationship with the world around them. These are just, these things are prevalent. So I started to go back in the Wayback Machine in my little time machine called iPhoto, and started to think, okay, how did this relationship with technology build over time? Well, this probably didn't help. I curse Apple for being so great at design that they could design an interface that a 1.5-year-old could use without any coaching. And we strive for that level of usability every day, but look at that. I mean, that's I'm putting it all out there today, my friends. No shame. And there's one other thing that happens because for my job I travel quite a bit, and many nights this is the relationship I have with my children through this. I mean, FaceTime's great, but a lot of the technology that we use is supposed to bring us closer together. It's a point I'll get to a little bit later on, but he was legitimately sad that night that I wasn't there. And it's things like this that make me question that this notion of work-life balance also. I had someone tell me he doesn't believe in work-life balance. So I was like, how could you not? Like, you're a dad too. It's like, no, it's not about work-life balance. It's about work-life harmony. If I'm in a meeting with a client or a stakeholder or a team member and I get a call from my wife, I'm going to take that call. But also if I'm at home and I'm having dinner with my kids and I get an urgent text from a team member, I'm going to take that as well. And I'm like, okay, I see your point, I see your point. But again, we have such finite time with our kids. And has anyone heard the phrase, data is the new oil? Yeah. And I think that's true. I think, it's basically, incredibly precious commodity. Everyone's going after it. Your data is the lifeblood of, the products and services that we use. I have a different perspective on it. I think time is the most precious commodity because every hour that I can't spend with them or every hour that they're on that device is one less hour of human-to-human interaction. It's also an hour closer to the inevitable day when my kids will want to have absolutely nothing to do with me. And I often tell clients that time is the most precious commodity because we use time as currency a lot when we're talking about digital experiences. Talk about spending time, wasting time, saving time. We want to make sure that the relationships that we have with brands and with digital products and services is time well spent. Why? Because we are time starved. We don't have enough of it to give. We work 9-10 hours a day. We travel. The kids are at school as well. And so transactional experiences, transactional relationships are the norm that we pursue. However, that human-to-human interaction is precious. It is like gold. And because we live in a supply and demand world, there's no supply of time and there's increasing demand for that connection. So I wanted to talk a little bit about design through the eyes of a child and the perspectives that it brings through essentially three primary categories: the good, the bad, and the beautiful. And then hopefully a sign of hope for things to come. The good. So there's two large seismic shifts that are happening in the world today that technology has brought about. The first is this notion of Industry 4.0. Anyone familiar with that term? Yeah? Or the fourth?
I don't like it, but
You don't like it?
no, I don't like it.
All right. Well, I didn't coin it. So. You can blame Klaus Schwab, who's the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, coined the phrase in about 2015 or 2016. And it's basically how machine learning, artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, and the use of data in somewhat sneaky ways is really changing our relationship to the world around us and to each other. It's changing the future of work. It's changing the future of life. It's changing how much we rely on technology. And that's just, you know, that's kind of heightening our kids' expectations for what technology can, should, and does do for them. And our response to that in the design community is what's been called computational design. So just a brief primer on what that means, right? So there's been three primary phases of design. The first is basically classical design or traditional design. This is the making of things like chairs or art or, you know, even in some respects traditional advertising, architecture, what have you. We have the second phase, which was design thinking, and I love design thinking. I practice it all the time. And it really, that design thinking obviously came out of, you know, things like Stanford D School and the 5 hexagons, and it's really as much of a business strategy a construct as it is a design construct. Basically, whiteboards, sticky notes, and markers, right? You can't do design thinking unless you have Post-its. I think it's a rule written somewhere. So, and that's really about creating connection between seemingly disparate capabilities, right? And bringing systems thinking into the equation of how to build things, and also answering the question of what it is we should build, right? Across strategy, product, engineering, and design. And then we have computational design, which is kind of the understanding of technology, the understanding of algorithms, and using computational methods to create experiences, right? And those things go hand in hand. And that is the future that our kids are going to be growing up in. Those are the expectations that they will have of the world around them. Me? This is what I had growing up. That is a 1981 Compaq that had no onboard memory. I think I had 64 kilobytes of memory on a 5¼ inch floppy disk. I wrote all my college papers on it, and they were printed out via a 9-pin Okidata dot matrix printer. I was not the most tech-savvy kid growing up, and you know, for the last this is now my 23rd year as a designer and as a creative director, and I always felt like I was always playing catch-up. Right? My kids don't have that that problem, you know, I'm happy to give them that opportunity. We also have this guy. Now, I'm not saying I was in support of his campaign or anything like that. He's not even running anymore, so it's okay. But he was the only candidate who was really talking about the robot apocalypse or the automation apocalypse. And he says, most Americans agree that technology is going to eliminate many more jobs than it is going to create. So, so what is our response to that? We're putting more and more investment in STEM education, right? Science, technology, engineering, math. We have a boss at Publicis Sapient who calls it STEAM, not STEM, because STEA is art, right? So that's how computational design, you know, can hopefully help us stave off the robot apocalypse. And there's also something just inherently cool about technology and giving them access to experiences that, you know, not that long ago, you just simply didn't have access to. You didn't have the money, you didn't have the time. This is at an arcade, so we didn't have to travel anywhere for them to go on a racetrack and experience life on the superhighway. That was, you know, simply the cost of entry. And in a lot of ways, technology can be the great equalizer, right? It can create economies of scale. It can create opportunities and access for people who've never had it before. And it doesn't, you know, the cost of entry is actually quite low. It doesn't take a whole lot of money to have access to experiences that were, you know, not too long ago, life-changing. And I think that's very cool. And I think it's also innately magical. You know, this notion of tech as the great equalizer. However, there's obviously the dark side of the force. and you know, the bad things that can certainly happen. So I'm going to bring up one thing, which is the bane of my existence, which is this right rail, the autoplay feature in YouTube. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume, because I don't know the backstory behind autoplay. I'm assuming that in their design thinking conversations, they were saying, you know what, we have to make it really, really easy. There's a pain point of people being able to find content that's relevant for them. So we're going to make it extremely and extraordinarily easy for them to get the content that is specific to their likes, their preferences, their areas of interest, and we're going to just open up the floodgates and create unlimited access to all the content that they could possibly want. And then they said, hey, why don't we also give them the ability to turn this off? I was like, okay, that would be great. You have no idea the pain that little feature causes me. And I don't believe that my kids even know that you can turn it off, because that's a bit of a dark pattern, if you ask me. That access point is so small, so obscure, and so unlabeled and mysterious that they would never know to click on it. And I think at this point, Google probably gets way too much advertising dollars. This is being streamed on YouTube, so hopefully they won't come in with a drone and shoot me. I love it. I love it. That they have no intention of ever getting rid of it or modifying it, right? There's just too much money at stake. And when I think about that, I think about how my kids are just so stuck to that, I can't help but think about this image.
I'm sorry, is this YouTube?
That's YouTube. Yeah, that's YouTube.
Is there a way to turn it off? I hate this thing, and I look everywhere to turn it off.
Yeah.
That's when it shows you, based on your history. I can't have it, because sometimes, like, I do a presentation or something, or whatever, like, I don't want my kids to see what I was,
Yeah. There's a little bit of a privacy concern. Yeah. Yeah. Mommy, what is yeah. Yes, there is a way to turn it off, and I think this might be a slightly outdated screenshot, but there's a little toggle up there that says autoplay, and you can shift it off. But it's insidious for sure. And when I think about ethical design, I think about what choices do we allow people to make for themselves. Malcolm McDowell certainly did not have a choice. And in that particular scene, is anyone familiar with this? Is Clockwork Orange, 1971, horrible dystopian future. Hopefully we're not there yet. We'll see what happens in November. Basically we're teaching people how to think. We're shifting expectations. We're removing the empowerment that technology was supposed to provide. And it's kind of like brainwashing in a lot of respects. I hope it's not too controversial a statement, but shame on us, shame on them for allowing something like that to happen. Because if you think about ethical design, I'll make this point again later on, but it's really about the cognizance and awareness and thoughtfulness of the unintended consequences of the decisions that we make, right? If you're not thinking about that, you're only designing something for yourself. And that's not what we do for a living. It never was supposed to be. And electronic addiction is very real. 44.5 hours per week are spent by children ages 8 to 18 in front of screens. I actually think that's a pretty conservative estimate. I'd probably put it a little bit higher. This is a study conducted by Harris Interactive that documents a national prevalence rate of pathological device usage. What a horrible term. Pathological device usage. When I think pathology, I think like sociopaths and murderers and certain politicians. I mean, this is not what we want to be associated with. And then 23% of youth report that they feel addicted to video games. Man, boy, that really gives me a lot of pause. I hope it does you as well, because this is like the people that, the brains behind this are the people that we've looked up to for a long time, who write the books that we say are almost required reading for being in this space, right? They they got some things wrong. It's okay to admit that. So how do we know that a kid is addicted to technology? Well, there's a lot of ways. I won't list all of these, and there's probably 10 pages worth of these bullets, but a couple of the ones that really gave me the most alarm. Someone who loses track of time while they're online, right? They space out. Becomes agitated or angry when device usage is interrupted. They throw a fit, they yell, they scream. They prefer to spend time online rather than with friends or family. They form new relationships, this is the creepy one, form new relationships with people that they meet online. Ugh, it's like a parent's worst nightmare. It's the digital equivalent of the white van that rolls up in front of the school. And you can be anybody you want to be online. They don't get that just yet. And then, of course, becomes irritable, moody, or depressed when online. These are not normal behaviors, my friends. Okay? My wife, who deals with schizophrenics all day long, these are dissociative personality disorders that we are foisting upon our children, that I, as a designer, have to admit that I'm foisting on my own children. Not intentionally, but because this is such an important part of my life, it's obvious that it's going to be an important part of theirs. And yeah, it's not a point of pride. I will certainly say that. This is a quote from a principal at some random high school somewhere. She didn't give her name, didn't give her the school that she works at. I'll just take a moment to read the quote. "The internet is hurting students' ability to work in groups. Our teachers struggle to get them to participate in any kind of team assignments. Instead, they would all rather stare at the computer. When I observe them talking to one another in the hallway, I see young girls who are socially aggressive or inappropriate, and I can't help but think that the internet is socializing them in ways that emotionally stunts them, and it makes it difficult for them to deal with others in the real world." Anyone ever heard of Cambridge Analytica? Yeah. Technology that was meant to bring all of us closer together is actually driving us farther apart. And it's not too late. We can fix this, but this is frightening stuff. This is like Terminator level almost, to the extent that these machines are getting smart enough that they can start to make our decisions for us. We use this adage a lot at one of our clients, a very, very large and well-known retailer, who was able to predict that one of their guests, they call them guests, was having a baby before she had even told her own father. Think about that for a minute, right? We talk a lot about ethical design, and let's be clear. When we talk about ethical design, we're not actually talking about morals, right? Morals are kind of black and white. Ethics are gray. Somebody's ethics can be somebody else's non-ethics. But again, I contend that ethical design is, again, the forethought and awareness of the unintended consequences of our actions. And it starts with admittance of guilt, right? We've done this to ourselves. And in that sense, we're the culprits, right? Here's the problem. Algorithms can't feel. Bots suffer no consequences. We do. We are the ones who have to live with the consequences of our actions, which is why I'm happy to report that there's hope yet. So there is a wonderful, lovely book called Transforming the Difficult Child. Written by two sort of bleeding-edge child psychologists, and they talk about this theory of the nurtured heart. They call it the nurtured heart program. It's very interesting and fascinating in the sense that it seems very self-explanatory once you read it, but you never act or think the way that you think you would, because they use gaming design and behavioral psychology to understand what's happening in your child's brain when they're faced with these technological choices. There's a certain sense of comfort that comes from knowing what's happening and what's going to happen. And when it happens over and over and over again, it creates an even greater sense of comfort, and the choices that they're making are the right ones, because it's a sea of sameness, right? That repetition begets predictability, which leads to a heightened feeling of success. I've done it right, and it keeps happening over and over and over again. It's like when certain men go to a formal event, they like wearing a tuxedo because they know they didn't get it wrong, because everyone's dressed the same, right? Unless you have a good sense of fashion, in which I give you much credit. Also, when you're talking about behavior, right, it can be very difficult to get kids to understand that, that their actions have consequences, right? When you're playing a game, when you lose, you lose. When you die, you run out of men or guys or players or whatever it is, the game is over. They are comfortable with that set of consequences because it's learned over time, all right? And they accept it because they know that the game can start all over again, which is interesting. I'll come back to that point. The other thing that's interesting about this is, we talk a lot about positive reinforcement, and that's great. We are our own kids' most fun toys. Let me explain that. Negative attention is as good as any attention at all. And my yelling and screaming at them to get off their tablets and stop watching YouTube and get to the dinner table is as much of a fun reaction as a hug. And that's difficult because you think arguing and yelling is, gonna shake them out of their, stupor and get them to move. It doesn't. It doesn't. They want to do more of that because they still get time with me when I do that. Again, negative attention is just as good as any attention at all. But when you ignore the bad behavior and you focus on only the good things that they're doing, they get the reaction that they want from you and that sense of attachment and attention only when good things happen, which is the exact opposite of autoplay. Autoplay encourages bad behavior, right? You stick with it and you watch it. It's what they want you to do, but it's not what you're supposed to do. So I ignore that. You ignore the bad behavior. You just walk away and don't give them the attention. It doesn't sound like brain surgery. It blew my mind, and it has made all the difference in the world. There's one more notion I wanted to bring up, which is a study that was done initially by Brene Brown. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Brene Brown. And then there was one of her acolytes, who's a child psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania. Wanted to just play a video for you.
In education, the one thing we know how to measure best is IQ. But what if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily? One characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success, and it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. A few years ago, I started studying grit in the Chicago public schools. I asked thousands of high school juniors to take grit questionnaires, and then waited around more than a year to see who would graduate. Turns out that grittier kids were significantly more likely to graduate, even when I matched them on every characteristic I could measure, things like family income, standardized achievement test scores, even how safe kids felt when they were at school. So it's not just at West Point or the National Spelling Bee that grit matters, it's also in school, especially for kids at risk for dropping out. That talent doesn't make you gritty. Our data show very clearly that there are many talented individuals who simply do not follow through on their commitments. In fact, in our data, grit is usually unrelated or even inversely related to measures of talent. So far, the best idea I've heard about building grit in kids is something called growth mindset. This is an idea developed at Stanford University by Carol Dweck, and it is the belief that the ability to learn is not fixed, that it can change with your effort. Dr. Dweck has shown that when kids read and learn about the brain and how it changes and grows in response to challenge, they're much more likely to persevere when they fail because they don't believe that failure is a permanent condition. We need to measure whether we've been successful, and we have to be willing to fail, to be wrong, to start over again with lessons learned.
The belief that failure is not a permanent condition. When you live in a world where instant gratification is the baseline expectation, failure often becomes not an option. Where else do we talk about failing fast, failing early, failing often, and learning from our mistakes? Every single day at work. How much agile coaching and scrum mastering do we need to hear to instill in ourselves as design professionals that which we seek to instill in our children? The belief that failure is not a permanent condition. God, I wish she was at so many of my meetings. Angela Duckworth, funny enough, started off in consulting and saw the light and moved into teaching, and then after that, clinical psychology. And so I also was interested in this notion of a growth mindset. I wanted to kind of one-up that a little bit, kind of put my own thinking out there in the ether. And instead of calling it the growth mindset, I'd like to call it the challenge acceptance mindset. Because nothing excites me more as a parent and as a designer than that feeling of accomplishment, than the feeling of overcoming obstacles or struggles, or more importantly, for the work that I do, helping a user overcome a point of friction or a pain point, or helping a client overcome a business challenge. And I love seeing my kids figure something out for the first time, or feel like they're empowered to do something they've never been able to do before. My daughter, I'm happy to report, just learned how to ride a bike 2 weekends ago. And it's just one of the things that clicked. And for years, she refused to even get on it. But she accepted the challenge, and she overcame the fear of failure, which was the only thing that was paralyzing her from moving forward. I can say that very confidently. So the challenge acceptance mindset is the understanding that failure is an option, the willingness to embark on a potentially failing experiment, and learn that that's okay. You know, it's okay to fail as long as you learn. And then as you grow over time, you'll be more and more willing to accept new challenges. So the question to posit then is, how can our craft as designers nurture a challenge acceptance mindset in the craft of design? Now, this is a thesis in progress, so I don't have any firm, fixed answers for you, but I am going to posit a couple of design principles, 3 to start and then 2 to finish up. The first design principle I'd like to offer up is augment, not replace, human-to-human interactions. That dissociative personality that we see in our kids, it comes from isolation, right? When you have that device in front of you, you don't need anybody else, you don't need anything else. However, you really, really, really do. We're seeing a lot of success with this, mostly in the realm of digital physical design, and I'm going to show you some examples of that I think are super cool. But never think that technology is going to solve all your problems. That's something you have to admit up front for your clients, for yourselves, and especially for your children. Celebrate, challenge, reward, victory. Now, there's been a lot of talk of like gamification in the space of like loyalty and account management. That's all fine and dandy. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about empowerment. I'm talking about rewarding positive behavior and ignoring bad behavior, like we heard from our friends who wrote the Nurturing Heart. Where I'm seeing this a lot is actually with like mobile banking apps that are not just there for the transactional relationship of deposits, transfers, checking your balance, et cetera, They're going to help you set up savings goals. They're going to say, hey, if you want to get that new boat or iPad or car, whatever it is that is your whim of the day, we're going to help you save toward that goal. In order to do that, we're going to encourage better spending behaviors and better saving behaviors so that you can get what you want, right? We're not an intermediary. We're a partner in helping you achieve your goals. I think that's pretty interesting. And the last one I'm going to offer up is empathy as a human pursuit. So never send a robot to do a person's job is basically what I'm trying to say here. I've been hearing a lot about these user research methodologies and techniques that use things like strapping a thing to your head and measuring brain waves, and we have all sorts of cool lab-based technologies and eye tracking, blah, 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 blah. Wonderful, use it, that's great. Those things can tell you what is happening. They can't tell you why. They can tell you what someone is doing. They can't tell you what someone is thinking or feeling. You have to go to the source. You have to go to the people who are actually faced with the choices of using a form or using a product or engaging in a service or having a relationship with a company. And you can't send a robot to do that person's job. So with that, in the time that I have remaining, I wanted to focus on the beautiful. Okay, because there is hope for us yet. And I'm seeing some wonderful and amazing things where technology has really improved not just my kids' relationship with the world around them, but our relationship together. Has anyone ever been to our tech house? I think it's fantastic. I think it's wonderful. I think they're doing some amazing things. And bring that volume down just a skosh. So what our tech house does a wonderful job of is encouraging you to engage with the space, and in so doing, engage with each other. They've managed to find a way to replicate certain feelings and emotions in the physical realm with digital techniques and technologies. This happens in a room a little bit bigger than this one. It's okay that it stopped. A little bit bigger than this one. And just the whole room starts to transform, and everyone lies in a big beanbag chair, or like the love sack, and this is a shared experience. And there's a lot of things you could do in this room that could probably augment it, but I think it's just a purely and truly magical experience. It doesn't have to be about something, you know? It's just about being there and doing and being together. This is another part of our tech house that I think is super cool, at least for this particular exhibit. It took my son about 30 seconds to realize that the space reacts to his movement, and not just through visual, but also through audio. And we stay there for about another hour. But, you know, that process of discovery, that eye-opening sort of awakening of the space coming alive by virtue of his presence is so just lovely, I think. Here we have, took both my kids, my daughter was sick at the time, to the Natural History Museum in New York. They had a new dinosaur exhibit. My son is super obsessed with dinosaurs, as most 6- and 7-year-old kids are. And first of all, with all the books that he has in his little personal library, we never knew that Tyrannosaurus Rex had feathers. We do now. Those kids are complete strangers to him. That's not a group that we knew, that we joined. But they all sort of organically formed this posse to attack at large and at once this massive beast. Not successfully. But it was such an enriching experience. He remembers it to this day. This is us at the Smithsonian, the new dinosaur exhibit that they have there. Again, obsessed with dinosaurs.
Daddy, about what this place looks like? Or
It's telling you how to navigate the museum. The museum is set up in chronological order.
Look at the facility and ease with which he navigates the space. God, if he didn't have an iPad, he'd be lost in there. But now, almost every weekend, Dad, can we go to the museum? Right? And he's learning, and he's engaging, and it's a shared experience. It's not isolating at all. Again, I'm seeing more of this in the digital physical design realm, but I think we can do this on our projects on a day-to-day basis. I think there's one more design principle I'd like to introduce, which is this notion of just sort of rekindling the memory and the reason, the purpose, why we got into this field in the first place. It wasn't necessarily to make a CEO more money or to get more people to buy stuff. And it wasn't necessarily, just for the sake of our own portfolios. It was to create a world that never existed before, that as children we never could partake in, right? The power of the creative process is indefatigable, I think. It's hard, it's a bit amorphous. It's hard to describe sometimes. It's very much inspiration and perspiration, like Edison said. But more importantly, as we get older, and we do this a little bit more often, we get a little bit jaded sometimes, and I'll freely admit that happens to me on a frequent basis. We have to remember we are no longer designing a world for ourselves. We're not designing the world that we want to live in. I think the people who are writing the algorithms for the autoplay really were designing a world for themselves, pretty selfishly, I might add. But design right now, in the 21st century, I think is an innately selfless act, if we keep in mind the people for whom we're actually creating these experiences. As fulfilling as it is, it's not about us anymore. So with that, I'm going to bring up an old friend, not really, a blast from the past, who's going to remind us of something.
Well, I think one of the things you really have to look at is you have to go watch some kids using these things. As an example, 97% of the high school students that graduate from Minnesota have hands-on experience with these personal computers, learning how to use them. We call this computer literacy. They're actually happening in the elementary schools now. And you go watch kids interact with these computers, and what you find is far from something quite harmful. In effect, what you see is an instantaneous reflection of a part of themselves, the creative part of themselves being expressed. And it's just very, very difficult to see these kids using this tool and realizing that they're going to have these tools available for the rest of their lives, to portray that as something very harmful. It's actually something quite democratic.
It's actually something quite democratic. That's what it was meant to be. We kind of lost our way a little bit, I think. And that video, by the way, was captured in 1981, and Steve Jobs was 26 years old. Now, you could say he was a marketing genius, and he certainly was. And you could say at the time he was really just selling something. And he was. And he was also disputing the myth that computers are going to be bad for you, which I think we've seen some evidence that that is possible. But he always, I think, believed in the idea, in the ideal of computers as a tool to unlock creativity. I think that's what we need to get back to. I think that's what we as designers should certainly continue to aspire to. Use the tools that we have, the technology that is at our disposal now that's never been there before, to unlock our own creativity. Computational design sounds like a wonky, geeky pursuit, but it is supposed to be, and it will remain, an innately human act, regardless of the robots that are there to help us perform it. So I like another aphorism that I'm going to introduce here, which is, technology is what you know, creativity is what you don't. Right? Technology is about capability. It's what you can do. It's what, it's technology for its own sake. I know this, I can code this, we can build it. Creativity is all about the process of discovering the unknown, inventing that which never existed before, really trying to understand what you should build before you build it, right? That is a responsibility that we should all hold dear. That should be paramount in our consideration set when we're embarking on a new project or thinking about a new product or service. Go to the source. Be human, first and foremost and always. and embrace the unknown, which leaves me with my last design principle that I'm going to offer up, which is to embrace curiosity. Let your mind wander. Explore the unknown. Challenge yourself to make mistakes. Learn from them. Don't be afraid of failure, but take those lessons with you, always. And with that, I thank you very much for the time. We have about 10 minutes. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Or if you just want the cool breeze of the outdoors, that's cool too. No? Oh, yep.
Yeah, so I really like this talk. There's so much here that I could make comments on or say, but one thing towards the middle that popped into my mind, a quote that I remember was, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. So a quote that I remember is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection and purpose. And I guess when you're talking about your kids, I feel like the problem is not the phones and the technology. The problem is that we put them in concrete blocks and we make them sit at desks and we grade them individually and we prepare them for college individually so that they can go sit in a cubicle and be individual in their cubicle and live in their individual apartment. And right, like it's not the technology. It's the entire life that we have imagined that we do in this modern world about sit in your box car, sit in your box apartment, sit in your box cubicle, be your own person. Don't connect with the other people. There's not the go outside and play because it's too dangerous. There's not the ability for a lot of these kids to have the curiosity that they want. Right, so if we're designing, I think it's more than designing technology. It's about redesigning, rethinking about what our culture and our society could be. And it's not, you were talking about, you know, computational design. It's, in order to do this, we use the UX process of bringing in everybody and trying to design that better society, not from an expert perspective, but from a bottom up, you know, like what can we make this world? So that was a comment, I guess. Any thoughts?
I mean, that's amazing. I have heard that quote before. I have some familiarity with addiction, and yeah, the opposite is not sobriety, it's connection. Because with whatever your addiction is, computers, devices, drink, drug, other people, it is such a soulless, empty, isolating pursuit. And you do it because you're fighting some other ghosts, some other demons, most likely yourself, frankly. And so you withdraw. And it's a natural response to, it's, you know, is it fight, flight, or flee? Fight, flight. Yeah, flee.
Freeze, flight.
Freeze, yes, thank you. Got to go back to school a little bit. Yeah, it's a natural response to aggression, to conflict, retreat, fight, or just like do nothing. And yeah, we got a lot of problems. You're right.
But they hang out on Facebook because they can't hang out necessarily together.
Yes.
Right. I mean,
agreed.
You know, and the whole society, the way that they're set up to compete with each other rather than learning how to get together because of the way that they're graded, and the way the classroom. I used to be a teacher, right? And I was stuck in the system teaching the way that the system made me teach, rather than say, hey, let's just go outside and you guys can create your own groups and you can explore your own interests and forget grades. You know, but maybe that's what we actually need is these like revolutionary, you know, changes to.
You know, I can't think of any better example of that than Facebook. You know, I think they probably went into it with fairly altruistic, you know, intentions.
Absolutely.
And it's been completely weaponized against us. It's I mean, I've locked it all out. I refuse to let my kids get involved in social media. But you know, I think ethical design is rooted in designing for purpose, right? If you betray your purpose, you are completely unethical in your design pursuit. That's my feeling. And if your pursuit is establish global connections with humans, they're doing the exact opposite of that. I think they've betrayed their oath, frankly.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Oh, yeah.
I'm just curious to know if you're using any tools or applications to kind of control and monitor what kind of content your children are
Sure.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, we have 3 layers. We have OS level layers, app level layers, and then sort of Wi-Fi level layers. I have a kill switch. I can I can get them off the internet anytime I want, and I threaten them with it every single day. And then they're all logged in through, telling all their secrets, but through my, they will watch this video and they will find a way around it. Maybe I'll talk with you offline. No, seriously. They're logged into my wife's iCloud account, so she knows everything that they're doing, can just boop, 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 off. Yeah. And we can always sneak in and change their iPads and delete apps when they're sleeping too. And I'm not above that, or below that, I should say. Yeah, over here.
Hi, Bill. Thank you for your talk. I was curious if you would expand a little bit on your topic of design through the eyes of a child. When I saw your topic title, I thought it was something different. And so I'm kind of curious of your mental journey of how you shaped your talk.
Well, what did you think it was?
I thought it would be kind of like not having assumptions, having a really curious, open mindset, and asking, and something like that.
Yeah, well, and that you're pretty astute. That was what I went in, thinking, the surprise and delight, the childlike wonder, right? I couldn't find a whole lot about that, because we're a very sort of skeptical society. Cynical, but it was more sort of like the dark patterns and the negative behaviors that I was observing. That was like, gosh, I have a responsibility and an obligation, not just as a professional designer, but as the husband of a mental health professional, to cast a light on myself and my industry for the things that we've done contribute to the things that I'm seeing. I can't blame them. I'm the parent. So I wanted to explore that for myself and kind of see if that would help any others, think about the work that they do on a day-to-day basis, and maybe assume some responsibility for our own craft. You can't say that there's a problem until you first admit it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk. I also came in with maybe a little bit of a different assumption of what it was going to be, but I'm really glad it ended up being what it is. So I find that when we're here in the US, we talk a lot about technology as, this great tool, but that's kind of becoming a pitfall for a lot of the kids. But then when I'm in conversations about technology across the world, I come from Rwanda, and we're talking about technology and how a lot of the kids in the developing world are going to be left behind this fourth industrial revolution because they don't have access to technology, right. And that gap is increasing. I find it very difficult to kind of reconcile those two and find the perfect balance. Do you think you can talk a little bit about, at what point do we say this is how much technology kids need, this is how much can allow them to, push their innovation or innovative minds and creativity, and this is how much is going to kind of stray them away from the ethical practices of how we use technology?
Yeah, in that particular, I don't have a good answer for that other than, we can how about this? We can use the developed world as our beta case, our beta test for the developing world, because if you believe in test and learn strategies, your initial innovation R&D tests are those that have had access for the longest time. Hopefully, through studies like the ones I was pointing to and just seeing and observing what's happening in the space, we can make our own conclusions collectively. But certainly, all the evils that I've been pointing out, if you've never had it before, then certainly it's not going to be a prevalent issue for you, because if you're just starting in it, that childlike wonder, that discovery is just starting. So let that happen. I don't think device addiction is going to be a real issue, if we're still getting to a point where everyone has a device, or trying to get everyone access to a device. So. I think it's first world problems maybe that I'm talking about here, but I still believe in the power of technology. Just you know, like everything, in moderation. Yeah.
I guess one question that kept bouncing around in my mind was just kind of, how do you strike the balance? Because any product, any experience you're designing, you want it to be pleasurable, you want it to be something that people want to engage with, but at the same time you don't want it to kind of devolve into, for lack of a better word, the addiction. So have you kind of figured out how to strike that balance?
I have not. If I did, I would. The talk would have gone to the 40th slide, which is, here's the solution. I don't have it, but look, I think there's always a balance between engagement and transaction. I think there's always a balance between the relationship you want to have versus the relationship you do have, and the means with which you transition from one to the other. You know, we're still actually a pretty nascent industry. Hopefully by Industry 5.0, we will have figured it out. But the problem is these algorithms, again, are written by humans. We tell them what to do. So it's up to us to think ethically about, you know, again, the impacts of our decisions and writing them not for ourselves, but for others. So that you can, you know, the balance starts with us and the behaviors we want to see in others. But that sounds like a 2.0. All right.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, everyone.